Yuru is a painfully ordinary human being who has never experienced life beyond his tedious little village. His key abilities involve tracking animals and being taken advantage of by grumpy old villagers. However, Yuru's entire world is torn apart when his age-old settlement is struck by present-day military weapons, endangering the life of his strange twin sister and exposing the hidden abilities that both siblings secretly possess. In a far-off, isolated settlement, a woman screams in agony due to her grueling labor. However, the attending midwife wants her to endure a little longer because she is on the verge of delivering twins who will one day command fearsome demons. One twin stands for the darkness of night, while the other stands for the brightness of day. 16 years down the line, that fateful evening has since guided Yuru and his sister Asa to lead a quiet yet peculiar existence in a tranquil settlement. Yuru passes most of his days tracking animals in the woods like a primitive caveman. Entirely cut off from the outside world, he gets by like a commoner, silently tracking his targets and bringing them down. Yuru has mastered the craft of hunting, but when it comes to the broader world, he is utterly oblivious. When Yuru gazes up at the sky and spots the trail left behind by an aircraft, he refers to it as a gorgeous dragon's belch, having no other way to describe it. Following yet another fruitful hunting expedition, Yuru makes his way back to the modest settlement he calls home. His companion, Danji, another clueless soul who looks up to Yuru, is already enthusiastically waiting for his closest friend to return. Danji is constantly in disbelief that Yuru heads out into the woods completely by himself. Nevertheless, Yuru is convinced that the two sacred guardian statues positioned near the village entrance are watching over him. Upon stepping back into the village, it becomes apparent that everybody deeply admires Yuru, not just for his ability to hunt, but also for his willingness to work without any pay. Even Danji's mother has a soft spot for Yuru, wishing her own son would be as dedicated and hardworking as he is. But Yuru's existence is far from ideal. He shares the village with his sister Asa, who spends her days locked away behind iron bars inside a prison cell. Unlike Yuru, Asa is a strange, fragile girl who is terrified of ever stepping outside the village. She has lived nearly her entire life in total seclusion from everyone else, apart from a handful of villagers. She too holds deep admiration for her brother, who ventures out and hunts entirely on his own. But Yuru is disappointed because he had been aiming for much larger game. The village has been going through a serious dry spell, and if things keep heading in this direction, Yuru will be left with no choice but to start preserving meat by drying it. Asa fears that the shortage of food will push most of the villagers into abandoning the settlement. Even though Yuru has no desire to burden his sister with worry, he is fully aware that the whole village might eventually need to uproot itself and rebuild somewhere new. Since Asa is unable to ever leave the village, Yuru is set on becoming the most capable hunter the village has ever seen. He is determined to stay by his sister's side, regardless of how bleak the road ahead may look.
After confirming that Asa is doing all right, Yuru makes his way over to visit the trader Dara. He is quite the prominent figure himself, supplying all sorts of goods and foodstuffs to the villagers. Dara is among the rare few who actually ventures beyond the village walls, meaning he has a solid grasp of what is happening in the outside world. He informs the villagers that the financial situation is rough and that a widespread illness is sweeping the land, though none of these people have any real grasp of what those terms mean. Everybody seeks out Dara when they require remedies or particular kinds of seeds. By the time Yuru tracks him down, he is already swamped with villagers pelting him with all sorts of questions. As is typically the case, Yuru has no real business with Dara, but the trader turns out to be far more considerate than his appearance suggests. He hands Yuru a small gift that he had picked out especially for Asa, well aware that the brother never stops looking after his sister. Given that Dara rarely passes through, Yuru is genuinely happy to cross paths with him again, welcoming the chance to catch up with a longtime acquaintance. Later that afternoon, after Dara has left the village, Yuru puts in time working the fields alongside Danji. Regrettably for him, Danji is about as shallow as a person can get. He longs to escape the village and even harbors hopes of getting acquainted with Asa. In Danji's view, the villagers who have departed never seem to come back, which leads him to believe the world out there must be something spectacular. Yuru, on the other hand, treasures the calm that the village offers, and the mere idea of his sheltered sister crossing paths with someone like Danji makes Yuru wish he had never befriended this guy in the first place. But one cannot always be selective about their company. As the two keep up their back and forth, Yuru suddenly picks up on an unsettling presence hanging in the air. He can detect something rapidly drawing closer, and initially mistakes it for a dragon. This is a sound Yuru has been picking up for quite some time, and it never fails to put him on edge. Within mere moments, the protective barrier shielding the village from the outside world inexplicably collapses, leaving it wide open to a devastating assault. As the boys look upward, they catch their first real glimpse of an aircraft at close range. The situation deteriorates further when military helicopters begin circling overhead, hovering like dark, threatening birds. The once serene village finds itself encircled by intimidating helicopters. The villagers are rapidly overcome with dread, horrified by the appearance of these bizarre machines. For a community that lacks even basic plumbing, the vision of an enormous flying metal beast is absolutely terrifying, and widespread panic erupts almost instantly. To make everything even worse, ground-level armed soldiers have also pushed their way into the village, and they waste no time slaughtering large numbers of people. The village elder, Yamaha, quickly understands that the barrier has fallen and that these soldiers have come specifically for Yuru, and she commands the surviving villagers to protect the boys at all costs. As the situation continues to spiral, Yuru and Danji make a frantic dash toward Asa's location after stumbling upon numerous lifeless bodies scattered along the way. However, in an unexpected turn of events, they find themselves face to face with two members of the invading armed forces. The moment the soldiers lay eyes on Yuru, they immediately draw their weapons and begin firing without hesitation. But the pistols in their hands are no match whatsoever for the arrows launched by Yuru. Before either soldier can get off a clean shot, he neutralizes both of them on the spot. This marks their very first encounter with the raw power of a firearm, completely unable to wrap their heads around the devastating capability of something that resembles nothing more than a small toy. After dealing with the intruders, Yuru gradually comes to the realization that there could be additional soldiers lurking somewhere nearby, so he uncovers a hidden passage leading to Asa's underground cell, a tiny concealed entrance tucked right beside the sacred guardian statues. This comes as a complete shock to Danji, and the pair waste no time pressing ahead. In the meantime, an unhinged young woman by the name of Gabby, who seems to be operating alongside the armed forces, unleashes her horrifying abilities to cut down even more defenseless villagers. She derives immense pleasure from watching bodies get torn apart, cackling with delight as some unseen force rips through limbs and faces without mercy. A young girl stands frozen in shock as Gabby savagely ends her mother's life right before her eyes. Yet, rather than finishing the child off as well, Gabby chooses to spare her, because hurting children is the one boundary she refuses to cross. Out on the edges of the village, Dara had also been caught off guard by an ambush but managed to escape with his life. He clearly has far more knowledge about these events than he lets anyone believe, and he is well aware that a particular individual has finally shown up with the intention of taking Yuru away. Inside Asa's cell, a mysterious woman hauls the unconscious body of Granny Yamaha across the floor. She then turns her gaze toward young Asa, cowering behind the bars, absolutely petrified. Rather than coming to her aid, the woman channels energy through her hands to generate a tremendous force that shatters the bars and instantly inflicts fatal injuries upon Asa. At this stage, the village has been completely overrun by the invaders, and by the time Yuru charges in to rescue Asa, all he can see is devastation. The village elder lies gravely injured and Asa is sprawled motionless across the ground. When Yuru frantically calls out for his sister, it is the fully grown woman standing in front of him who answers back. For reasons beyond comprehension, this eye patch-wearing woman is claiming to be Yuru's sister, and she has every intention of protecting Yuru while making it clear she will eliminate everyone else. Yuru feels as though he's been plunged into a nightmare. He flat out refuses to accept that the same maniac who struck down his sister could somehow also be his sister. Consumed by fury, Yuru reaches for his bow and launches an attack on the woman, but she channels her mysterious abilities to obliterate the entire surrounding area. At the same time, Dara has slipped back into the village undetected, carefully weaving around the hovering helicopters and taking out armed soldiers as he goes. But he has the terrible luck of running straight into Gabby and her grotesque-looking creature with its enormous jaws. This beast was unmistakably the very thing behind the mass slaughter of so many villagers. Armed with a borrowed weapon, Dara attempts to bring the creature down, but the gun he took from the soldiers is about as useful as a toy squirt gun. When that plan falls flat, Dara resorts to lobbing a grenade instead, banking on the explosion to buy him enough chaos to slip away. Back inside the makeshift cell, the woman who claims to be Asa has only made the situation far more chaotic by unleashing her powers. The whole place is in complete disarray, and Yuru can barely mount any kind of resistance. Yet despite appearing completely lifeless, the younger Asa is somehow still breathing. Her blood begins to stir, slowly spreading outward before morphing into some kind of monstrous entity. This creature clamps down hard on the adult Asa, giving Dara just enough of an opening to pull Yuru out of harm's way. As the two make their exit, Granny Yamaha instructs Dara to smuggle Yuru out into the wider world and ensure he stays out of the enemy forces. Without wasting a single second, Dara moves urgently to get Yuru clear of the village. Along the way, while Danji checks to make sure his mother is unharmed, he also catches a glimpse of Yuru being hauled off by Dara. There is no time for any kind of goodbye between the two friends, and Danji breaks down sobbing as he watches his one and only companion being dragged off to an unknown fate. Yuru is an absolute wreck at this point. One moment he was nothing more than a simple village boy, and now his sister is gone while some attractive eye-patch-wearing stranger is claiming to be Asa in her place. Yuru can barely put one foot in front of the other, and Dara is left trying to manage his total breakdown. In the span of just a few moments, Yuru has lost absolutely everything. And as the military soldiers keep unleashing fire at them from their hovering aircraft, Dara can clearly see that the boy is in desperate need of something to lift his spirits, so he reaches into his belongings and hands Yuru a jade pendant, instructing him to wedge it in between the two sacred guardian statues. Yuru's day had already been going downhill at an alarming rate, and now, on top of everything else, Dara has him scraping at the dirt to slot in some peculiar emblem while simultaneously trying to avoid getting shot. Once the whole thing is done, Dara
abruptly slams Yuru's face straight into the ground, allowing his blood to pour out onto the jade. As it turns out, a sacrifice of blood was necessary in order to bring the jade to life. As Yuru screams at Dara for pulling such a completely unhinged stunt, the soldiers aboard the helicopter have him squarely in their sights, barely a heartbeat away from squeezing the trigger, but a blazing golden light suddenly floods their vision, and the helicopter begins spinning out of control like a runaway carnival ride. Yuru stands there in stunned amazement as two radiant golden beings latch themselves onto the helicopters, tearing through the metal with their claws and sending the aircraft crashing to the earth below. They treat the helicopters like mere playthings, wrenching them apart and hurling them in every direction. Dara and Yuru scramble desperately to get out of the path of the falling helicopters, as they come within inches of flattening them both.
Gabby is also watching the whole spectacle play out from a distance. She had been counting on those helicopters to carry her back home, but now she and her bizarre-looking creature are going to have to work out their own way of getting out of there. The sheer pandemonium makes it nearly impossible for Yuru to get a clear picture of what is actually happening around him. But as the smoke and debris begin to clear, he can gradually make out two distinct figures emerging from the haze. A towering, intimidating-looking man and a powerfully built woman gaze down at Yuru, addressing him as their new master. Despite the fact that these unusual individuals regard Yuru as nothing more than a boy, they are bound to carry out his every order without question. Dara then steps in to clarify that these two strange-looking figures are in fact Yuru's very own demons,